Okay, now this is the second segment in the first portion about energy. I was talking about some basic principles of energy and how ancient peoples and people like yogis and Buddhist meditators and renunciates and so on took the attitude they took toward energy. It's very different. So what I'm going to do in these series of videos is explore a very different approach to energy. And before we talk about the different types of energy, I'm going to talk a bit about the ways that a human being can perceive energy. Now, to begin with, we have to talk a little bit about perception. Because, in our daily life, we have our own identities, our egos, and we go about performing our various activities, playing our different roles. And, we often forget, first, among a group of human beings, each of us has a very different point of view. We see things a little differently, and we're somewhat limited because each of us has various degrees of development of our physical senses. Some people, for example, they smell better, or their taste, their sense of eyesight is better, and so on. And hearing, some people have very good hearing, and so on. Now, so that's a basic limitation to begin with. Now, beyond that, we have studied the human senses for quite a while in modern times, and there's certain limits. Our audio tendency, for example, our ears can perhaps hear maybe 20 or 15 cycles a second, maybe up to 20,000. Um, Although there are birds and insects who can perceive frequencies that are very, very a much wider range, or even lower range. Some beings can perceive sounds. Now, there are certain sounds that we definitely would not want to hear, and that's why it's a blessing that we don't have those senses. For example, the Earth apparently groans along at about 7 cycles a second, and if we were able to hear that, we probably would just keep hearing this loud groaning, rumbling constantly. We don't want to be able to hear that. So what we have to remember is that there's a very distinct limitation to our senses, just as being a human being. That means, think about what this means here, that actually if you look at the universe as an infinite source of energy and frequencies and just this vast thing, and you take a straw and you put it up to your eye and you look around, you're looking through a straw. You're looking at whatever existence is. Right, we're in this. We live here. We daily, we get up and we go about our business. There are things that we don't see. They don't perceive them. There are radio waves. There are subliminal sounds. There are all kinds of things that we don't perceive. We don't smell them. We don't taste them. We don't hear them. We don't see them. So now think about what that means for a second. When we look at, say, a mole or something that is basically blind, it digs around the earth and it has a tremendous sense of smell and it can dig like crazy, but in many respects is basically blind. Now, we are like that. No matter how sharp our senses, you have to think about this for a second. We are moles in the amount of we actually perceive in our universe. Our normal perception is very limited. Now, what some ancient teachings have said for a long time, and even modern teachings, is that the human being can be trained and in a specific manner can experience not everything, although there's an incredible amount of stuff that a human being can perceive, but the human being has certain equipment in it, including the brain and parts of the brain in the body, that our body in some ways is like an antenna, an incredible antenna, and it's also not only a receiving antenna but a broadcasting antenna. So that's what these yogis say. That look, you own a Mercedes Benz, a Rolls Royce, but you think it's a Ford. You think it's a Yugo. You have a human body, and the kind of energy that you can access depends on how much you know and utilize the equipment that you have. Now, I'm going to have to go into quite a long series here because we only have 10-minute segments, but I was going to talk a little bit about some of the aspects of energy, and then we'll have to continue in the next segment. It's very easy for even our basic perception to look at nature, and you can understand some really basic things that if you're smart, and there have been smart people for a million, perhaps we don't know how long, but there's been smart people, geniuses way, way back, and lots of them, who realize you look at nature and you can see waves and you can see whatever the powers are. You don't have to give them a name particularly, but you just observe carefully the manifestation of nature, how, for example, the wave nature. Waves are easy to see in nature, and you can feel them. So, without having to know all the specific mechanics and math of waves, you understand some of the principles. And there's a couple basic principles we'll just mention. One is there is a duality. Energy involves some kind of transfer. If you have a rock hit into a pond, it will transfer the energy of its weight and its momentum into the pond, and the pond will spread the information out and it'll create waves. So there's a tendency, and heat, for example, radiates out. There's a tendency for a transfer, a movement, which involves duality. It involves a point A to point B. You have a source point, so that's another principle. There's a singularity, a point, and then there's a transfer. There's a movement. Then you have duality. See, there's some basic things you get involved in. And then you have a triplicity. You have the various numbers. Then you start getting into some different aspects. You have an up and a down, and so on. So you observe nature that way and look at the various characteristics. And there's many, many characteristics of energy and how energy interacts. In the principle of duality, you have different kinds of energy or objects intersecting with each other. There's always going to be some kind of a intersection. We see that everywhere in the universe, and so the intersections create a matrix, and the matrix creates substance. Without a geometric matrix, it's around the geometric matrix that substance forms and form takes place. You see, so you get into the single, the second point, the third point, the fourth point, and so on. And so if you look at energy in a step-by-step process, you start with one point and move forward a bit, and you start looking carefully at the moments, at how that manifests. Now, I'll have to go in the next segment to expand on